The major sticking point in the distribution of Nigeria's so-called oil wealth at the moment seems to be the sharing quota between the oil companies, the federal government, and host communities. And that is what the Petroleum Industry Bill is designed to address when or if it finally becomes an act of parliament. We'll be paying close attention to the unique features of this troubled relationship from the point of view of increased recognition of the divine rights of host oil communities and why continued infringement on these rights by the authorities could lead to further disruption of operations in the oil and gas industry. We're now being joined by Oke Epia, Executive Director, OrderPaper, Nigeria. Good morning, Oke. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Oke. It's good to have you again on the program. But let's go straight to business. Petroleum Industry Bill. Where are we now? I know that it has passed first reading. It's been referred to the committee, the relevant committee, second reading, and assurances from the Senate President that this time around, that bill will be passed expeditiously. Do we have any indication that that will happen 20 years after the Parliament started considering this all-important bill that is supposed to lead to reform and change in the petroleum sector in Nigeria? Any hope?
Oh, well, I mean, I would say there is hope for perhaps the first time we are seeing a resolve by both arms of government, the executive and the legislature, in passing this very all-important bill, like you have stated. It is currently an executive bill, and given the cordial relationship that exists between both arms of government, which has been reinforced by the commitments that have been made by the leadership of the National Assembly, we would expect that this bill would be passed, like they have said, not later than the middle of next year, you know. But in doing so, all of the gray areas, if not all, most of the gray areas need to be properly interrogated and addressed, if possible, especially around host community issues, where we have a couple of reservations, you know, around the provisions to take care of host communities in the Delta and across the country.
What would those reservations be?
Okay, to understand those reservations, it's important to probably try and break down, give a bit of some highlights of what the host communities component of the PIB is. Like you very well know, the PIB is an omnibus piece of legislation, you know, proposed a law to reform the entire petroleum sector, you know, and it has a segment for the fiscals, it has a segment for administration, it has a segment for governance, and of course, the one that we are speaking about is on host communities issues. And, you know, it promises to foster prosperity for the host communities. It promises to provide direct economic and social benefits. It promises to, it seeks to also wants to foster a harmonious relationship between the companies and host communities. And of course, finally, the fourth point, to create a framework for sustainable development of the communities. You know, but the routes, you know, through which these broad objectives want to seeking to be achieved do not appear to be able to achieve them. So it says it will create host communities trust funds. The companies would create these trust funds. The companies would also appoint members of these trust funds, specifically members of the board of trustees of these trust funds. You know, and there is a curious provision in the proposed law which says that these communities trust funds membership do not necessarily have to be appointed from the host communities. In other words, the companies could go elsewhere, where, you know, from wherever, and pick membership of the trust funds. You know, it also seeks to say, okay, we'll give 2.5% of communities, of the operating expenditure, the OPEX of companies in the preceding year as contribution to the trust funds, you know, which is the principal funds where the monies would come from. But I mean, operating expenditure is something that is it's not quite clear. It's an ambiguous term. It's something that needs to be further broken down. It's something that I am able to, from what I've seen, from interactions that I've had with host communities and experts in the sector, is something that appears to give the companies some leverage, some discretion, some overbearing control, to determine what is it that they are able to contribute to the fund. Host communities are also concerned about the fact that the bill does not seem to be clear on what is a host community and what is impacted communities. And these are issues that are very dear to the minds and hearts of host communities. My organization, OrderPaper, we have had a couple of interactions, fora, with host communities in the Delta. And most of the things I say here, and I'll be saying, are an aggregation of some of these concerns that have been raised by host communities. If these communities are fundamentally concerned also about the issue of ownership, they see this bill, the provisions for them in this bill, perhaps as some form of palliatives that do not adequately address the issues, of ownership, perhaps fair compensation, for their contribution to the Nigerian economy. Of course, we know that ownership is a constitutional matter. Section 44 also of the Constitution vests the ownership of mineral resources in the federal government, And so PIB, yes, attempts to want to assuage some of the hurts, decades-long hurts the Delta communities, the host communities have felt. But the communities themselves and the stakeholders are also saying, perhaps this is a chance to do much more than is promised in the bill. 2.5% is not enough, especially because only the companies are able to determine that. Is this an opportunity to look at greater ownership for compensation, and assuaging the heart of the communities? Can we look at, for instance, the options of, equity, of royalties, of rents, like it's done in some other jurisdictions? Because, when people who have agitated for this long do not see adequate sense of hope in what you are proposing, you are not probably going to get the best, of objectives, your objectives achieved if we continue down this route. So in a sense, in a summary, there is a question around inadequate sense of ownership. There is a question around too much discretionary powers, imposed or to be given to the companies, that the settlers, in constituting and operating the funds. There is a sense of, inadequate, there's some ambiguity around what is a host community, what is an impacted community, so because some communities they actually host assets and facilities of for production, but others, they are impacted by, the production activities. The bill does not clearly, provide who gets what, at some point in time. So these are some of the issues and highlights of the concerns, that we probably need to interrogate and find a way to address as we process this bill in Parliament.
So two things. I want some clarification. At first, you talked about oil companies paying a certain 2.5% to this trustee fund. But I want to ask, is that not what is happening with the NDDC as it is today? Aren't oil companies paying a certain measure to the NDDC to still be able to develop these communities? And has that worked? And secondly, Peter Sele was here a couple of days ago, and he was talking about the fact that when the PIGB, the Petroleum Industry Bill, finally goes through, automatically deregulation happens and we get some certainty as regards petrol prices and the likes. I mean, what's your take on that and how will that happen? I just want to know the process or the mechanism at which that will happen. Those two questions, please. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Rafai. Let me take the first one around the NDDC. The NDDC is a law, and it is 3% for oil companies to contribute to that commission. But you and I know that the region, the Niger Delta region, has not quite satisfactorily gotten enough. You know the story of deprivation. You know the story around how poverty works on all fours. Our environment is degraded and degenerated in the region. About 13,400 communities, host communities across the Niger Delta area, most of them which are rural communities, are faced and continue to suffer the consequences, of oil exploration and exploitation. So there is never enough, really. And come to think of it, the NDDC that we talk about, what has become of its intervention in the region? The NDDC, many would say, and I also agree with them, is another form of patronage framework created by the political class, to, in a sense, attempt to assuage the hearts and provide some sense of development for the Niger Delta. But that is not really the case. That's not what we are saying. You and I are witnesses to what happened to the scandal, the unresolved scandal, very, very embarrassing scandal, with the NDDC in recent times, which appears to be, going under the carpet, and nobody's talking about that. So that is quite different from the host communities forms companies are mandated by the provisions of this bill to contribute to a development trust funds in the communities where they operate, in the communities where they exploit, where they produce, petroleum. Because we know that if we do not also put this in law, it might be difficult. Communities do not have the muscle, to hold companies to make them develop their areas. So putting it in law, let me refer at this point to the MOUs that companies have with communities. There have been reports, in fact I read one just yesterday where the Delta State government was saying that, look, we are not impressed with the fact that communities are not complying with the MOUs that they entered with host communities in the state. So you see, that is why there is a need to legislate it. These contributions, what some may call CSR of companies, put it in the legislation so it becomes mandatory. So it becomes a failure to penalize defaults if it happens. So this 3% of the NDDC is different. It continues to exist in spite of its flaws and difficulties and challenges and scandals, in the NDDC. It's different from what is proposed, the 2.5% OPEX, in the petroleum industry bill. The other leg of your question, whether it would address the issues of deregulation. Yes, in a sense, I think that's what is supposed to happen. Even though the government says to us that they have started some kind of deregulation. There is still a lot of unclarity around what is going on, where the government still fixes or says it provides a ceiling, for marketers to sell products. In my little understanding, that's not how a deregulated market works, where there is no competition, where you have a so important products, where, government gives ceilings and say, look, this is what you will have to sell, and nobody hardly ever says below that ceiling, So, yes, PIB provides that kind of holistic regulation of the sector. Like I said earlier, it's also a governance bill and an administration bill. It's going to create, what they call a midstream and downstream authority. It's going to create the upstream regulatory commission. So all of this will provide some sense of fair competition, some incentives for competition and private sector and private investments, which is currently lacking in the sector to come on board. So with time, PIB promises that capacity, that potential to be able to allow a deregulation that is genuine, a deregulation that is profitable, a deregulation that allows for a free market and competition to occur that would make, what we are currently facing, peter away.
Well, okay, I like the fact that you said earlier that we should be optimistic this time because there is some kind of collaboration, if you like, partnership between the legislative arm and the executive arm under the Ninth National Assembly. But this PIB that we're talking about now, this is a revised version that the executive arm of government has forwarded to the National Assembly. Has anybody seen it? Why has it not been made public so that the public can make inputs, particularly with regard to some of the contentious issues on the basis of which President Buhari refused to give assent in 2018. One of the reasons given then was that the Petroleum Regulatory Commission will retain 10% of revenue, and government objected to that. 2, the proposed expansion of the scope of the Petroleum Equalization Fund. Well, there are many people who will say expansion of the scope of the Petroleum Equalization Fund may be a bit odd within the context of what they call the deregulation of the downstream sector. There were also issues about the phrasing, the drafting of the law itself. Have you seen this particular bill, the revised bill that the executive arm of government has sent across? And some of those contentious issues, what have they done with those parts of the bill?
Yes, the bill is in the public domain already. It's now before Parliament, so it's accessible to the public. We have it on our platforms at OrderPaper and different other platforms where it has been made available. The question about should be really how we are engaging with the bill. Before I address this question, I would like to say that, yes, while there is an advantage in a harmonious relationship between the executive and the legislature, on which basis we have the optimism that this bill will sail through this time around, there is also an inherent danger there because, that relationship could also be exploited very quickly to pass a bill that does not give us a sense of what exactly we want, that does not address the concerns of citizens, of host communities, of companies, and of investors, because the fact that the bill did not receive adequate engagement, in the drafting stages. I know that a couple of civil society organizations raised these issues around why are we not seeing the bill, 1 year into the second term tenure of the administration, even though it was a promise of the first term. We have not seen the bill. They said they are drafting. They kept shifting the milestone on which to make it available to the National Assembly. So what I'm saying is that there is a gap that we have missed, in engaging with the bill in the drafting stages. I say so because even the unions at some point did not even see the bill. The Pengasan, they also had issues raised about where is the bill? We haven't seen it. You are drafting it. It's just in some closed-door circles where the bill is now in the public. The onus is now for stakeholders to engage with the bill. And these stakeholders, that is part of what we have been doing at OrderPaper, especially around the host communities' issues of the bill. Stakeholders need to pick up this bill, and I expect that the National Assembly would employ and deploy a robust stakeholder engagement system. Like you noted, the bills have been referred to committees in both chambers of the National Assembly. So we expect to see a robust engagement, not just beyond the usual public hearing that they would do in the National Assembly. We would like to see this bill taken to zones, to states, to regions, to communities, to stakeholders, and let there be, a robust input into the passage of this bill. Otherwise, some of the issues, that we seek to want to correct, they will probably just, remain unaddressed, and we'll have a law that probably causes more problems for us than we would envisage. The issues that you raised about why the president didn't sign the bill as passed by the last assembly, the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, the PIGB. Yeah, those are issues that could have been resolved if there were, if there was a joint resolve between both arms of government, to give us a legislation for the petroleum sector of the economy. But the key point is that there was a whole lot of politics and politicking that those issues got caught up with. And those issues became, symptoms, became red flags, became ready excuses not to have, signed the bill into law. Issues of 10% retention, fiscal issues. Those could have been addressed. The president could have written to the National Assembly in good time and say, look, address this issue, and they would have a conversation, probably address it. I know for sure that there was a resolve by the last National Assembly to pass the bill, but that resolve did not quite resonate with the executive arm of government. But now that we have this, seeming joint resolve to pass the bill, the key point that now needs to happen, the key thing that now needs to happen is robust engagement. We are not saying that enough. We are not seeing enough of that yet. It needs to begin to happen by government, by civil society, by the media, by private sector, You know, and nobody should miss an opportunity to engage in some of these fora that we're engaged. We have engaged local communities in Port Harcourt and somewhere in the South. We had an invitation to invite stakeholders in the, in the oil industry, regulatory agencies. You know, many of them didn't turn up. The point is that there is now opportunities to engage, and every opportunity that provides itself to engage on the base should be grabbed and embraced by stakeholders, so that we do not just leave this thing to chance and allow a National Assembly to just, okay, look, because in a sense, I mean, we know that this National Assembly is, seriously beholden to the president. And, they have made it clear to us more than once that whatever the president brings to their table, they would pass it. So Nigerians will not allow, should not, Nigerians should be vigilant. Look at this bill and see, look, these are our positions on this bill. This is what we want to change. The issues around host communities, for instance, 2.5% of OPEX, it needs to be properly broken down. It needs to be properly explained to the communities. Communities need to know, for instance, what would happen if they suffer glass flares from producing areas, So these are issues, many of which have been raised from some of these engagements that I'm just amplifying using your, highly esteemed platform.
Well, you've raised so many issues, and I want you to just give us an overview of the journey of this bill and why exactly we're still here 20 years after the fact, especially when everybody is heralding the end of the oil era. Within the next 30 years, commercial exploration of oil has been ongoing in Nigeria for 60 years. Why have we failed in such a monumental fashion, in our monoproduct economy, to actually get this bill signed into law? What is it about our political process? You've mentioned things like marginalization of some stakeholders, the host community feeling distrust, also distrust between the executive and the legislature, even the high turnovers of legislators. Just give us an overview of some of the problems that are illustrated by this particular issue that actually show us a lot of the ills that we face in Nigeria and why they are as they are.
I mean, very important question.
If we could do that quickly in 2 minutes.
To look at
If we could do that quickly in 2 minutes.
Well, this is a very... what we are seeing is a lack of political will. This is a question that will require more than 2 minutes because it's something that needs to build a theoretical framework for. Nigeria is a rentier state. Nigeria is a mono-economic country, because of the rentier economy that we operate, it's necessary. It has become, an attraction for the political elites, for the political class and its business collaborators, the corporates, the corporatism, system that runs the economy, to maintain a dysfunctional petroleum sector, such that, the issues around transparency and accountability would be covered up by all of the, dysfunctions and upheavals in the industry, So the basis of our economic foundation is faulty. That is why we are where we are. Since 2000, when President Obasanjo, set up the Oil and Gas Industry Committee, which actually is the beginning of the journey in response to your question. So for 20 years, we have been on this journey, and we are still not where we are. Still, where we are is not desirable. It's not where we ought to be. Ghana, we started a process. In fact, Ghana, it is said that Ghana came to understudy what we're doing with the PIB, and now they have a law and they have an open, transparent system of running their industry. Yeah, we're still talking about the PIB 20 years, after we started off on the journey. So it's a failure of the leadership class, and its co-conspirators or collaborators, I should say, in the economy and, business class to get the industry to work and actually provide appropriate, adequate, fair returns to both the government, the people of Niger Delta, and citizens of this country.
You are quite correct. Leadership. That was the same conclusion we reached with the guests we had before you came to join us. But, well, we hope that someday Nigeria will get the leadership question right. Thank you very much for shedding light on the PIB. Thank you very much indeed.